and terrible, and you're going to want to give up that relationship, right? It can't happen overnight. And I wanted to know, well, what is the evolution? How does this work? So the first thing I did, and as Bill mentioned, we start off in the field when we have these open-ended big questions with qualitative research. So the first study I did was with 40 adults who self-identified as having been turned against a parent by the other parent when they were children. For sure, I didn't ask them, did one parent alienate you from the other parent? Because they might not have recognized that term. So I asked them, did one parent turn you against the other parent? That's our layman's, definition. And I found 40 adults. There were many more, but I stopped collecting data after 40 using qualitative research standards for saturation, meaning I started to basically hear the same story over and over and over again, and I realized I had enough data. So one of the questions I asked these 40 people was, how did mom do it? How did dad do it? How did they turn you against the other parent who you're telling me was a pretty good parent, didn't hurt you, didn't abandon you, didn't beat you, didn't molest you? How did it happen? And they talked at length about what the favored parent did and said. And from that lengthy descriptions of the 40 people, I identified what I considered at that time to be sort of the hit parade, the top 10 or 15 behaviors that a parent engaged in. But I was pretty sure that that wasn't the whole story, because these adults are talking from their memory of being children having been turned against a parent by the other parent. Surely they couldn't know all the strategies. And so the next study I did was with Doug Darnall, and we surveyed 97 targeted parents. And we asked them, well, what do you think your other parent, the other parent of your child, is doing to turn your child against you? And as you probably know, targeted parents really feel very satisfied in being asked about their experience, and they were very, very willing to share. And in the end, I think we had something like 1,300 behaviors that the targeted parents had listed for us. And Doug and I compiled them and culled them down using inter-rater reliability, and we boiled them down to a set of about, again, I think it was like 8 to 12 behaviors. And so on the one hand, I had the insights from the adults who lived it, and on the other hand, we had the insights from the parents who were currently living it. And as I'm sure you can imagine, there was tremendous overlap between the two lists. So for example, everybody knows that one of the strategies is denigrating the other parent to the child or within the child's earshot. But there were certain things that only the parent living it knew. So for example, withholding communication, not sharing letters or cards or things that were sent from one parent to the child when the child was with the other parent. This is back in the day when people actually wrote letters and cards and mailed things. We don't do that anymore, I know. But back then, that was something that happened. And the adult children weren't really aware of it, because if the letters weren't coming to them, how would they know that this was happening? So we put together the two lists into what ultimately became the Baker Strategy Questionnaire. And the first attempt to do this was back in 2010-11 with an NYU doctoral student named Jacqueline Chambers. And we took the two lists and we put them together, and through several rounds of piloting and several iterations, tweaking the words here and there, we came up with a measure of 20 items. Some of the 17 primary parental alienation strategies needed to be unpacked for a research measure. So actually there were 19 items, and the 20th item we added, which said, one parent tried to turn me against the other parent. So it wasn't a specific strategy, it was just the whole ball game in one item. And that first study, we had 105 graduate students in the sample. They were from a mix of backgrounds, and some were from intact families, some were not. And the first thing we started to ask was, well, if alienation happens more often in separated and divorced families, and we can think back to Bill's definition, this is something that usually but not always happens in divorce situations, we hypothesized that the rates of alienation, the number of items checked off on the Baker Strategy Questionnaire, would be higher for those who were raised in non-intact families. And we did in fact find that. And we also hypothesized that everybody who checked the 20th item, one parent tried to turn me against the other parent, would also have checked more of the other items. And in fact, we found that too. So this was the beginning of establishing reliability and validity of this measure. Okay, so, boy, I'm whizzing through here. I'm having time for lots of questions. All right, so I don't want to go through in tremendous detail all of these studies. I just want to show you there's 10 altogether. And each of these 10 uses the Baker Strategy Questionnaire in a different sample, asking different questions, but every single study asks the essential question, is this a reliable and valid measure? Because if the measure is not reliable and valid, then none of the findings would be relevant. Reliable means that the 20 items fit together statistically into a single coherent construct. And the way that you test for reliability is through this statistic called alpha. So that's why there's a column for alpha. That's not somebody's name. That's a statistical construct. And an alpha score should be 0.70 or above. And when it's 0.70 or above, it means all those items belong together. They're all measuring the same thing. It doesn't mean they're necessarily measuring alienation. That's the validity end of things. Reliability is just asking, does this measure work? And so you can see going down the column for all of the 10 studies I'm going to tell you a little bit about, the alpha for the Baker Strategy Questionnaire is always close to 0.90 or higher. These things belong together. Parents who do some of them tend to do a lot of them, and people who don't do them, you're not going to do any of those. None of the items are going to be checked off. So you can see, and certainly somebody who says, yes, my parent tried to turn me against the other parent, they're also going to check all the other ones. So we can have confidence that this is a reliable measure. And this is important, not just because it means we have a good measure, but in the United States, when you want to be an expert and you want to testify about parental alienation, there's many little hurdles you have to jump through. One is has this been accepted by the scientific community, and Bill did a great job showing how it has. Another of the hurdles is, can this construct of parental alienation be reliably measured? And so we need to show, anytime we're talking about a measure of parental alienation, whether it's the Baker Strategy Questionnaire or some other measure, you have to show that it's reliable. Okay? So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each study, and then I'm going to summarize it and then move on. So the first one was a doctoral dissertation at Yeshiva University. So Naomi Ben-Ami was the doctoral student, and we had 108 adult children of divorce. So that was our sample criteria. They had to be an adult whose parents had divorced when the participant was a child, and we had 108 of them in the interview. The Baker Strategy Questionnaire alpha was 0.96, and we found that there were strong, statistically significant associations between scores on the Baker Strategy Questionnaire and psychological maltreatment. So I tried to cram that into the box.
Yeshiva University in the United States.
Yeshiva University in the United States, thank you. So PM always stands for psychological maltreatment, self-sufficiency, and self-esteem. And I think I left off there attachment, which was also measured in that study. We picked these constructs, Naomi and I, based on the research on the 40 adults. So now I'm going to rewind for a moment. When I did that original study of the 40 adults, and I asked them, how did your parent do it? How did your parent turn you against the other parent? One of the other questions for that study was, what does this mean to you now? How do you think this affected you as a person? Because they could have said, yes, my parent did all of these things and it made me hate my other parent. No big deal. No, not a problem. Oh, it's good. I'm good. But that's, of course, not what they said. All right? right? They said this was the worst thing that happened to me. It ruined how I felt about myself. I'm racked with guilt about how I treated that other parent. I feel that I have a hole in my heart. I missed all of these important milestones. I hate myself. I'm depressed. I can't get out of bed in the morning. I'm a failure in my life. They felt that it was a very, very damaging experience for them. And so in order to substantiate those findings, because the qualitative research is just the beginning, what Naomi and I did was we replicated that study using standardized measures. So instead of asking our 108 adults, well, so what did it, how are you doing? We gave them a standardized measure of depression. We gave them a standardized measure of self-sufficiency, a standardized measure of self-esteem. The Rosenberg self-esteem measure, everybody probably knows that. If you know anything about measures, it's sort of the most widely used. So we picked sort of the cream of the crop measures that nobody could quibble with us using. We didn't make up our own measure of depression or self-esteem. We used, highly reliable and valid and existing measures, and we found strong associations between scores on the Baker Strategy Questionnaire and all of these constructs, showing that even if you threw out the study of 40, oh, that's qualitative, that's no good. Even if you threw it out, you'll see over the next 3 slides, every single finding that we present in that book has now been substantiated in other studies. So the next study was conducted with Marla Broussard, and we surveyed 222 ninth grade boys. So what's particularly important about this study is, first of all, we're now looking at the concurrent effects of alienation. How are these people doing now? Rather than in the first study, which is, okay, you're an adult, how did the alienation affect you over your life? But also, we surveyed every single kid who showed up in school that day. There's absolutely no sample bias, there's no self-selection. You could say, well, in the first study, who chose to be interviewed, who responded, to the query, do you want to participate in a study? Maybe the people who were doing worse off wanted to be in the research. But here we had permission from the school, the New York City Board of Ed. We jumped through a million hoops to be able to go into school on just a particular day and give every single kid who showed up that day the survey. And what we found was, yes, psychological maltreatment in this sample was associated with the experience of being maltreated. I'm sorry, maybe I said that wrong. Scores on the Baker Strategy Questionnaire were associated with higher scores on psychological maltreatment measure and current depression. So people who said, yes, one of my parents is engaging in all of these behaviors, were currently, even if they didn't know it, were actually scoring very high on a depression index. The next study was conducted with a colleague in Italy, so here we're taking the results international. So we translated the Baker Strategy Questionnaire, and we again replicated the original adult children of parental alienation syndrome findings, but here with a completely different sample of college students and graduate students, and we used what's called a snowball strategy. We asked people who completed the first round of surveys, could you name 3 people you know? And from there we got a large sample of 257 Italian, the first study here is 257 Italian undergraduates. I don't know if we use snowball there. And again, we found that scores on the Baker Strategy Questionnaire were related to depression, self-esteem, self-direction, experience of having agency in their lives, and actually cooperation. They reported themselves to be less cooperative. And you can sort of imagine how that would relate to alienation, because here the kids are, when they're being exposed to the alienation behaviors, they're being encouraged to be uncooperative with their parent, and here we're seeing a spillover into their adulthood.
Is this a concurrent or retrospective?
The strategy questionnaire is when you were a child and you experienced these things, and then concurrent depression, self-esteem, self-direction, and cooperation. Baker and Eichler, 157 college students. Again, this is everybody who was taking intro to psychology at a particular university on a particular day, everybody who showed up for class was given the Baker Strategy Questionnaire and a measure of psychological maltreatment. And next, Verrocchio Baker does 739 adults. Again, very large sample size, nice alpha, 0.94. Here we're starting to unpack the relationship between exposure to alienation as a child and the experience of your parent as caring for you. And higher scores on the alienation strategies, the Baker alienation strategy measure is related to the experience of your parent as being more controlling and less caring. How am I doing on time?
You're good.
Okay. The next, Burnett, Baker, and Verrocchio, it's the same sample, 739 adults. Here we were looking at different outcomes. Here the Baker Strategy Questionnaire scores are related to scales on the symptomatology, the symptom checklist. So this is a psychiatric measure, psychological measure that asks about OCD and paranoia and depression and anxiety and a bunch of other experiences of concurrent functioning. And what we're seeing is that the greater exposure to Baker Strategy Questionnaire, higher scores on that, the more likely people are going to be suffering as adults in their life. So again, just replicating the findings and showing this is bad news. And this is, I just want to pause for a moment and say, the reason this is so important isn't for us to say, yeah, I knew it, this is really not a good thing to do to kids. Although that's helpful to have our personal beliefs reinforced by the research. It's really important. We try to convince the judge why to do something about it. When I'm testifying to that third of the rest of us to do that, we have multiple hurdles to get through. The first one, we need to convince the judge alienation is real. This is something that really happens. It is possible for children to manipulate unjustifiably. If they don't believe that, you kind of stop. Not even, you're nowhere. Then you sometimes have to convince them it's actually happening in this case, because they might say, yeah, it's real, but I don't see it here. You need to help them connect the theory to the facts of the case. And then you need to get them past the so what. Because in my experience, the judge has a built-in reason to do nothing. And it looks like, yeah, alienation is real, and yes, I even see this happening. But fork in the road, both of them. The first fork is the kids are doing so well. They're the captain of this, and their grades are so great. Why rock the boat? They can't be that bad. The kids look like they're having a blast. Or the other fork. Yes, alienation is real. Yeah, I can believe it happened. But doing well. They're suffering. They say they'll run away. They're cutting themselves. They're depressed. They can't rock the boat. They're so no matter what, the judge has a reason to do nothing. And when I train judges, I don't know if there's any judges in the room. I apologize in advance if I hurt anybody's feelings, but I tell them, you're lazy cowards. And you know what? They go like, yeah, you're right. I guess you're right. Because whatever the status quo is, that's what they want. They love the status quo. And that's partly because there's research that shows that people feel worse about actions that they take that have a bad result than actions that they don't take that have a bad result, right? So they feel safer doing nothing. So when we're testifying, we need to explain to them why they need to care, why they need to do something about this. And I've developed 11 reasons why the court should intervene, one of which relates to this research here, which is that alienation is associated with numerous bad outcomes, even if the kids look great now. Even if the kid's getting an A in chemistry, they're still suffering and they will suffer because of this. So that's why you study after study after study showing the same thing. Okay, so I'm gonna keep moving. The bottom one there, Verrocchio, Baker, and Burnett. Here's another large sample. So in Italy, they know how to get big samples, man. If you ever want to do a large sample study, go to Italy. Okay, I am going to move past all these studies, and I'm going to summarize this a little bit because I'm now only 5 minutes in. So first of all, there were 7 different samples, 10 published papers, over 2,300 participants from New York, Texas, Chieti, Italy. We had adults and teens, and in every single study, the Baker Strategy Questionnaire was both reliable, very high alphas, and valid, meaning it was related to the very things that theory says it should be related to. Okay, I'm going to just talk a little bit about alienated kids. This is where the research needs to be more focused, in my opinion, and it's, of course, a lot easier for me to do research on adults than kids. So if anybody has access to kids, I invite you to construct some studies that continue to show the difference between alienated kids and estranged kids, or that alienated kids exhibit these behaviors. So Doug and I did our first study. We had 68 targeted parents, and we asked them, describe your kids. And because we suspected, it's possible that targeted parents already know about alienation theory and might have described them in the very ways that theory says they should be behaving, we asked them to write vignettes, and so we had some evidence that they were actually telling stories that lined up with the research. And I'm going to fast forward that the data did show that alienated kids are described by their parents as exhibiting the very behaviors we would predict. I then did a small-scale study of 40 kids in a high-conflict treatment center, 20 of which were alienated, deemed by a custody evaluator in the courts, 20 of which were not alienated, just high conflict. We gave them this measure, which I call the Baker Alienation Questionnaire, asking them to talk about their parents. Tell me something good about your mom. Tell me something not so good about your mom. Tell me something you liked about your dad. Tell me about a memory that you have. Looking at the 8 behavioral manifestations of alienation, trying to get the kids to reveal whether their thoughts and attitudes and feelings about the parents were consistent with alienation or not. And based on their responses, we were able to, without knowing which group the kids started out in, we were able to reclassify them 96% accurate. So alienated kids talk and sound a particular way. They refuse to have a good memory of the parent they now say they hate. They refuse to say anything bad about the parent they are aligned with. And you can see that in that measure. I did a study with a colleague in Texas where we asked them to report on their own behaviors when they were kids with their parents and the behaviors of the parents towards them. And what we found is that when a father was reported to have engaged in the 17 primary parental alienation strategies, the subjects reported being alienated, unjustifiably negative towards their mothers. So here we are sort of replicating the alienation theory in this study. I'm sorry, I'm going fast. I'm going to skip this because Bill Burnett did a great job talking about this study. And what I want to say is the 8 behavioral manifestations of alienation are so unique and so specific, you don't see them even with kids who have been beaten, abandoned, molested by a parent. And there's 5 sources of data that show this. This isn't just me saying this. There's lots and lots of clinical writings. Every book about how to do treatment of abused kids will tell you the hardest thing is getting these kids to admit that their parents hurt them. There's research with rats that show that if you hurt a rat, a baby rat, near their mother, they will not experience pain because our brains, these rat brains, are hardwired to not experience pain when you are near a parent because you don't want the baby to associate pain with the parent. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Harlow's research on monster mothers. Everybody knows the Harlow research on the babies attaching to the wire monkeys. But he took this a step further and created monster mothers. So first he got them to attach to the wire monkey, and then he made these wire monkeys abuse their babies. Don't try this at all. Very mean. Very, very, very mean. But no matter what cruel thing these monster mothers did to their babies, once that attachment was there, the baby would go back to the monster mother for comfort, even though it was the monster mother inflicting the pain on the baby to begin with. There's research on kids in the foster care system who've been removed from home because their parents treated them so badly. What they want is to go home to the abusive parent. There's so many 40, 50 memoirs written by adults who were treated very, very badly by their parents, and the common theme throughout all of these memoirs, and I've done a fairly detailed narrative analysis of these memoirs, and I wrote it in a book called Bonded to the Abuser, shows again that abused kids basically want to repair the relationship with the abusive parent so that they can feel good about themselves. And I'm going to save the new research for another time. So I just want to say my final thing. So there is support for the four-factor model, not just the elements individually, but my final study I want to tell you about that's in preparation, it's not published yet, is I created these vignettes, 16 different vignettes. Each vignette reflected a different version of presence or absence of each of the four factors in the four-factor model. So vignette 1, none of the factors were present. It wasn't a prior positive relationship. The parent was abusive. The favorite parent wasn't engaging in alienation, and the kids weren't acting like alienated kids. And vignette 16, all four factors were present. Prior positive relationship, absence of abuse by the rejected parent, the favored parents engaging in a whopping number of alienation behaviors, and the kids are behaving like alienated kids. And I had 68 professionals, maybe some of you in this room participated in this. You didn't know there were 16 versions of the vignette. You only thought you were rating, the only version. And what was going on? And what we found is that 100% of the pure alienation vignettes were classified as alienation, and 81% of the non-alienation vignettes were coded as not alienation. And directions for future research. I'm happy to share the Baker Strategy questionnaire so other people can translate it and replicate it. I want to see the research published that doesn't have my name in it. I'm tired of this, doing it all alone. And I don't think it helps the field to have everything be, Baker, Baker, Baker. I think it would be more compelling when we're on the stand talking about it, that it's not just me doing it. And we certainly need more studies about the behaviors of alienated children. There's always more to learn. And I'm done.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. We're going to go into our coffee break. Don't move. Any of you who have questions of Dr. Baker, now's your chance. How about a question? Yes.
Hi, thank you very much for your most interesting talk. I have just one question. The thing that I'm always confronted with is the critique that all this research is based on retrospective.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. It was actually in my penciled notes to say that. So, we're never going to have a study where we take infants and we randomly assign them to, you're going to be alienated and you're not. Well, we don't live in that world. Right? I mean, even Harlow can't even do it to, to monkeys anymore, right? And that's a good thing. So, and maybe somebody has $1 million and can follow children from birth to adulthood. I don't. If there's somebody who wants to give it to me, I'd be happy to do that study. So in the meantime, we do what a lot of psychological research is, which is retrospective research. It's the problem with retrospective research is if you could argue that their current state of mind would cause somebody to falsely remember their past. So somebody who's depressed might say, oh, I'm so depressed, everything in my childhood was horrible, and it's not that the horrible childhood caused the depression. So the way that I think about this is, what's the likelihood that in every single study, in all the kids, everybody who showed up in college one day, hundreds of people, thousands of people at this point, with all of these different measures, all of them happen to have the same particular bias. it's not really likely. So you could, any one study would be a problem. But if you keep replicating it and keep finding over and over and over again, you really are converging on causality.